Welcome back to The Learning Gardener. We are officially doing a trip down memory lane and having a look at the way the house was when I first bought it a year ago. This is the original placement of the kitchen, which has now become a living room area with a fireplace in the middle of it and two bookshelves on either side. I then also knocked down the dividing wall here in the bedroom off to the right on the screen to open this whole area up to create a huge dining room and an open plan kitchen, which I absolutely love. But it has been a year tomorrow since we got keys of this house, and putting this video together has been kind of crazy because it's made me realize how much has changed. We took those cupboards and put them in the pantry, took that wall out, and that is now where the kitchen bench is. And as I cook in the kitchen, I get to look out into the garden. This was a beautiful tree in the middle of the yard, but it was actually quite diseased, full of white ants, and it was an iron bark that had fallen off another tree and rerouted itself to some degree. And you can see the garden was in a fair state of neglect. Basically, they were just mowing the lawn and that was about it, and nothing else had been done in a very long time. So the garden itself has been through quite a transformation, and I really, looking at all these videos, cannot believe how much it has changed in the space of a year. Sometimes I look around and I see messes that I've created and things that I still have to deal with, and weeds everywhere that are out of control because we've had so much rain recently. But ultimately, I cannot believe how much has changed in 12 months, how much growth we saw in the vegetable garden together. And now we're in the process of resetting this winter for another season coming up in a few months' time. And it's just amazing to see how much change there is. So I hope you guys enjoy this video of a wander down memory lane, looking at what was and what now is. And I really appreciate you guys hanging out with us as we do this 1 year review. this is when things really started to change, when some people my builder knew came and uninstalled the kitchen and took it away to reuse it. I was totally happy for them to have it. I did not want it, and it meant I could start doing things like pulling up the floorboards and trying to do things that would, with the help of my dad, help the builders focus more on what they needed to do and help me keep my costs down. Meanwhile, I also focused on what felt at the time like the never-ending job of dealing with the 2 trees that were cut down and the endless soil moving into the new Birdie's raised garden beds. Looking back, it was such a mammoth task, and I was so grateful when my friends would arrive and help me move some of the soil because I was exhausted, but I was so motivated. But there were a lot of surprises along the way, like the little black snake that I nearly got bitten by because I didn't realize it was in the cinder blocks when I was moving them. That was a fun surprise, but I really loved the process of putting the garden beds together and filling them and seeing it take shape and watching as everything grew. I was, as I am now, impatient in winter, hoping to see some change and despairing at how slowly things change. But inside the house there was a lot of change at the time happening as well, with walls being pulled out and the builders preparing for the kitchen, while in the garden I was preparing for the plumbers and for spring. But I was also waiting for the builders to give me the thumbs up to start painting. So in the meantime, the plumbers said they needed a trench dug to lay some pipe so that I could have more taps in the garden. So that was what I focused on, and in a way now I wish I had actually used them as an opportunity to create a swale type system. But the garden was coming along beautifully, and the dogs were starting to spend more and more time at the house and getting settled before we moved in. There wasn't going to be long until we moved in. We just needed to finish getting the walls painted, hopefully everywhere, before the flooring went in, which nearly happened. And we needed to get a kitchen into the house before we could move in. getting privacy trees, in this case pittosporums or pittosporums, depending on how you want to pronounce it. I usually just call them the pittos. This was an early priority. I wanted to make sure that we had some privacy in the house, and I also wanted to make sure that I tried to make my own oyas to keep costs down and keep my garden happy. And I was starting to create garden beds, and something that's kind of a quirk with this house that I now understand because I know more of the history, is that there's loads and loads and loads of glass and shattered porcelain in the topsoil, so I'm really careful when I'm removing the topsoil, and I always go through it really carefully. But honestly, I'm surprised that no one has trodden on glass yet. But this is the now open space with the cupboards yet to be moved, and this is where the kitchen now is. And I turned one of the bedrooms, this one, into a pantry, and where the old door was, we created a nice deep linen cupboard, because in this house there is no storage. And the kitchen coming together was one of those things that, because they're so expensive, I was so worried I'd made some wrong decisions along the way. But my kitchen is, I love it so much. But the bench tops went in on moving day, so it was a totally chaotic day. But we got there in the end with a little help from my best friend, and the kitchen got the finishing touches. I was happy as a clam. As summer arrived, the garden really took flight. I could not believe the growth in just a few short months. And I had some pest protection help from the puppies, who would search for mice and bush rats at night sometimes, and they would keep cockatoos away during the daytime. We also have an abundance of beautiful little birds who I think help keep us slug and fairly bug-free for a long time. And we really enjoyed our time in the garden, just watching things grow and marveling at how quickly things change. wasn't sure what to do with all the wood from the 2 trees, and I wanted to keep as much kindling from it as possible. And in hindsight, I should have just got the guys to mulch up the branches, but I ended up creating what I call the wood room because it sort of surrounds the fire pit at the back. And as summer wore on, I just marveled at how much nature will do if you just give it a little chance. It was just phenomenal to watch, and I had so much fun harvesting, even if I lost all of my corn to the local bush rats before they could even really fully develop. It was a bit sad, but I was amazed by the abundance, even though I hadn't really planned the garden and still haven't had time to plan the garden. I just could not believe how much we grew, and there was still a lot of spare space. I needed to get much more organized with my seed sowing, but between painting the house and moving, I just didn't really have time to do as much as I would have liked to have done. The tomato bounty was really something I was super proud of. I had so many tomatoes, I had to freeze them. And previously, when I've tried to grow tomatoes, I've been lucky to get a handful of tomatoes that weren't stung by fruit fly or didn't rot, or I just couldn't believe how prolific my tomatoes were. And I also can't believe how many tomatoes you really need to be able to, say, can up all the pasta sauce that you're going to be using for the rest of the year. I thought I was insane having 9 tomato plants, but it turns out that is not really enough because tomatoes don't make as much as you would think they do, but they are so much tastier when homegrown, and the same is true of strawberries. There's no comparing with homegrown now, and I can't really buy the store-bought ones anymore because they just don't taste the same. Sometimes it felt overwhelming, like every weekend there was a gargantuan task that needed to be taken care of, and I could never really get on top of everything. There was always something to do, and in a way I love that because I love feeling like I'm working towards something. But it is difficult when you turn away from something, like I turned away from the strawberries for a brief moment and then they were everywhere. But we were still bringing in an amazing harvest towards the end of the summer season and putting together more of the garden beds that I hadn't had time to put together before we moved in, and extending the garden beds. And there were actually, I had ordered way more garden beds than I remembered, which is kind of crazy that I forgot how many I ordered. But there you go. So there's now even more garden beds and more soil to move, a task which I, to be honest, am so overdoing. But I love the garden and I'm loving spending time in there, and it's going to be so fun to see what we fill these garden beds with over the coming months and to see how productive they can be. Once my freeze dryer got fixed, I could finally get back to freeze drying some produce, including these beetroots that just got left sitting in the garden bed for ages, and I powdered them up later. And as the weather cooled down, we managed to start testing the fireplace for the first time, which was really exciting. There's nothing I love more than a fireplace. The only thing has been that this year has cooled down so much faster than previous years. And that has meant that the crops that I planted and sowed in late summer and early autumn really have failed to take off because it got cold so much faster than normal. But we have enjoyed the latter stages of the growing season and winding down the garden beds and taking time each week to tidy things up, and where we can use our own compost to top up the beds and plant new things like potatoes so that we get the next harvest. We've got better at sourcing things to help the compost too, and it's been lovely to have my niece and nephew visit me and help me do things like spreading coffee grounds throughout the garden beds and into the compost bins. Recently, I've been trying to work on bigger tasks that are much more comfortable to do in cooler months than in summer months, like lifting these patio pavers and turning this into our mini home orchard, and working on trying to get Birdie to stop chewing on my fruit trees, which she did again today for an apple tree that I'm yet to plant, which is always fun. And that has meant that we've seen a lot of transformation, but it does also mean that I have neglected some other areas in the interim. But it has been really difficult to be in the garden lately, and you've probably noticed a decline in the number of videos we've produced, and that's because for the last 5 weeks or so, it has done nothing but rain. I think in the last 8 weeks we've had nearly 1.5 meters of rain, and this weekend we full on flooded. So my privacy trees need some rescuing. They were inches underwater. The cascading waters through the garden beds just overwhelmed everything, and it was just because everything's so wet. The mulch can't take up any more rain, and it was absolutely bucketing down endlessly. Every weekend we've had a couple of 100 mils of rain, and it's just been insane. I think this is a lot of the reason why seeds that I have direct sown or sown in trays have failed, because they've either been washed away because it's rained when I wasn't there, or they've been drowned, or I mean, just the amount of water is unreal. And while the flooding in my backyard is nothing compared to some of what my neighbors have experienced, it has motivated me to start working on digging some trenches to kind of act like swales in a way that will help me direct the water flow and hopefully divert it away from things like my pittosporums, which if they get one more drop of rain, I feel like they'll probably die. But it's just, it's been hard to believe how wet it has been. The little river that runs down the back of my place has been the fullest it has ever been. My best friend has lived in this street as well for over 20 years, and she has never ever seen the water been anywhere close to the top of the bridge. And not only was it over the top of the bridge, but it was well and truly deep. And even after a little break in the rain, you can see how quickly the water level has dropped down. But this is the normally tiny stream that runs down the back of our place. So there has been a lot of rain and destruction in the last few weeks, including the bridge being shut because a sinkhole opened up, and it's just been crazy times. So we haven't done a lot of gardening lately because we just couldn't. So thank you so much for hanging out with us and for watching these videos that we put together. I really appreciate it, and I hope you guys enjoy the journey going forward.